Alright, so out in the garage tonight and going to start working on the Mustang again, and we're going to start putting the clutch in it. If you watch my earlier video on the car, it's been sitting under cover since about 2008, 2009, so it's been off the road about 11 years. A while back I took the transmission out, took the clutch out and all that, and it's just been kind of sitting for a while. So looking to get back to getting this thing back together and running. So we're going to start that tonight. I'm making this video. Hopefully it'll help somebody out if they, need to take their transmission out or change a clutch or something to that effect. So unfortunately, I won't have the disassembly because I did that a while back. I wasn't making videos back then. But anyhow, I'm going to be doing it in reverse. Going to be putting it back together. So if you can put it back together, you can take it apart. Just reverse, obviously. So we're going to get started. Okay, so we're going to be starting to install the new clutch and get the transmission back in. So we're going to start off by replacing the rear main seal. You definitely want to do that if you went through the trouble to take the transmission out, the Bellhousing and everything else. I would change it irregardless, and you can tell this one was leaking. I cleaned up a little bit, but it was definitely leaking a bit. And then we're also going to change out our bearing there as well. We're going to go ahead and use our slide hammer puller for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get set up, and we'll start by removing the bearing first. Okay, so here's something you might run into. This is just my luck. This kind of stuff happens all the time. But I had the slide hammer in here, and this bearing is it's obviously the original bearing, and it pretty much seized in there. So basically, all the guts came out, all the needle bearings and all that kind of thing. So I don't know if you can see in there. What I'm going to do now is actually take this. This is just the outer race now. I'm going to try to tap this in and get it to a point where I can get a pair of pliers on and hopefully pull it out rest of the way. Once I do that, then we still got the outer part of the bearing to remove. Okay, so that's what the bearing looks like after you have to beat it out, basically. If it's seized in there, you're definitely going to have an issue. It took me about 20 minutes to get the inner part of the bearing out. Basically, using a drift, this is metal all the way through, so something you can hit with the hammer, and then just a pair of needle nose vice grips, and you just got to get in there and you got to keep grabbing it, and eventually you'll get it out. This is still the other part of the bearing. That's the outer part of the bearing. They never come out together. So basically what we got to do now is get our slide hammer in here and hopefully get this out. Be very careful as you're trying to beat the inner part out that you're not doing any damage to the inside here. It'd be pretty hard to do. That's solid steel back there, but don't worry about the bearing here itself, because that's going to be thrown out and the new one's going in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the slide hammer on here. We're going to try to pull this part out. Hopefully that goes a little bit easier. I put some penetrating oil on it. I recommend before you even attempt this to put some penetrating oil on it. Even the night before would probably be best, just let it settle in there. But we're going to go ahead and give it a try. Alright, so I finally got the outer part of the bearing out. That's what's left to it. It wasn't easy getting out. It was completely seized in there. The slide hammer wasn't touching it. So basically, I just took my chisel and I kept working at it. I got it to a point where I could actually break off pieces of the bearing, and then finally was able to pry it out of there. To be honest with you, your best bet, if it's stuck that bad, probably use a little bit of heat around here. Put your slide hammer back on and try that. I didn't have my acetylene torch here, so I opted to banging on it until it came out. But again, if you are going to do that, be very careful. You don't want to do any damage to this or the inside. But anyhow, it's out. So we're going to go get this cleaned up a little bit, make sure I don't have any burrs, and then we'll go ahead and we'll put the new bearing in. Alright, so we're all cleaned up. I used some brake clean to clean the inside of this out, and checked it for burrs. I had a little one, and I cleaned that up. So basically we got our new bearing. We're going to put a little bit of grease around this so we can get that set in there. It's going to use a little bit of the synthetic grease. Okay, so once you give that a couple easy taps, get that started so it's not falling out on you. I usually grab an impact socket. This one happens to be 24 millimeter. Something that's going to hit the outside of the bearing, and then use that and then tap that in with your hammer. Make sure that gets seated all the way. Alright, we're going to go ahead and change our rear main seal now. I always wait until after I get the bearing in to do that, just in case you miss with the hammer or something and happen to hit that. I'm going to go ahead and clean out the inside of this, make sure there's nothing in there. There really shouldn't be because the original seal was still in there, but we're going to go ahead and clean that up. Then we're going to take our new seal, and we'll take this, we'll apply some grease around it, and then we'll just tap that in place. Alright, so to get your sealing, basically you want to start up top or the bottom, side, doesn't matter, and start getting it set in, and then just kind of work your way around and get that set in nice and flat. Get yourself a flat punch. Don't use a screwdriver, obviously. You'll end up poking a hole through this seal, and it'll be ruined. So definitely something flat, and just go around, take your hammer and tap that in place, run your finger around it, make sure it's in there all the way, and that's it. You're good to go. Alright, getting ready to install the block plate now, or the spacer plate. That's the original Ford number if you need it. I don't think they're available anymore, but there is an aftermarket one. This one's in good shape, so I'm going to reuse it. The starter hole's good. I got a little spot right there, but I banged it down with a ball peen hammer, so not overly worried about it. So we're going to go ahead and get that put in. Alright, so there's our block plate installed. Just go ahead and line it up with your pins on each side. There's only one way it can go on. I guess technically you could put it on backwards. Just make sure this little lip right here, this little curve, is facing towards you, away from the motor. And your Ford part number would also, it's another indicator that'll be facing towards you, away from the motor. We're going to go ahead and get set up to get our flywheel put on. Alright, so I'm just going to prep the flywheel bolts so we can get the flywheel on. My kit came with new bolts. We're going to go ahead and put a little bit of thread locker on there. Not a ton, just enough, a little dab on each one. So go ahead and get your flywheel set in place. It'll actually only go on one way, so you don't have to worry about misaligning it. Your holes only line up in one spot. Go ahead and get your bolts in. This is a new flywheel that came with the kit. If you're not using a new one, make sure it's in good shape. You can get it resurfaced, but these kits aren't that expensive. I recommend getting a full kit with a brand new flywheel. You get the bolts with it and all that other stuff. So worth the investment. I forget what this one cost. It was a while back when I bought it, but we're going to go ahead and tighten them up with a 3/4 inch socket. 19 millimeter will work. Then we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 75 foot-pounds. Alright, so as you're torquing down your bolts, make sure you do it in a star pattern, across from each other. And chances are, as you're trying to tighten these up, the flywheel is going to start to spin on you. When it does that, go ahead and put a couple bolts in the flywheel across from each other like that. Find yourself a pry bar that'll fit in there. And I got it kind of where it's going to rest right there. So as you're tightening these now, it's got something to pull against. Alright, we're just about ready to install the clutch. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and just clean up the flywheel a little bit. Brake clean would be ideal. I got a rag with some denatured alcohol on it. I'm out of brake clean right now, but just go ahead and make sure there's no grease or anything like that on there. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get our clutch installed now. Make sure that this raised end is facing out away from the motor and away from the flywheel. You're going to need an alignment tool. If you bought a kit, chances are this came with it. If not, make sure you have it, because you're definitely going to need it. Slide that in. Alright, so I'm getting ready to put the pressure plate in, but before I move forward on that, I figured this was a good time to explain the clutch that I'm putting in. It's a 10.5 inch clutch. My car is a 1984, which would have originally came with a 10-inch clutch, but I'm doing a full upgrade. The kit I bought comes with the pressure plate, the clutch, the flywheel, alignment tool, throwout bearing, pretty much everything you need to do a complete overhaul. So I decided to upgrade to the 10.5 inch, which would have been in the 1986 through 1993 Fox bodies. So if you're upgrading, your kit like mine would come with this new hardware and those 3 dowel pins. And this hardware with the kit is metric. Your original hardware would have been standard, and you probably wouldn't have had the dowel pins. You would have had, the bolts would have been a little bit different. They would have had a little shoulder on them. So if you're going to do an upgrade from a 1979 to 1985, you can go up to the 10.5 inch. I recommend it, especially if you're spending the money on a whole kit. But just know that that's the slight difference from the 10 inch to the 10.5 inch. Okay, so that's your dowel pin locations. Just a little hint, these do not go in easily. You're definitely going to have a pretty good hammer to whack them in there. Just be careful that you don't hit them so much that you mushroom the ends. But they definitely don't go in easily. You got to use some force, and make sure you got them set all the way back. Alright, go ahead and set your pressure plate onto the pins. And there's one up there, of course. Make sure that your alignment tool is still set right, and then you can go ahead and start putting your 6 bolts in. So once you get your 6 bolts in, go around, do your crisscross pattern with your torque wrench. I believe it calls for 12 to 24 foot-pounds. I did 20, and then I gave it a little bit extra after that. But go ahead and make sure that they're nice and tight. Make sure, again, you do your star pattern. Once everything's nice and tight, you can go ahead and remove your alignment tool now. I'm going to go ahead and get the bell housing cleaned up, the clutch fork. This thing's pretty nasty in there. So I'm going to go ahead and use some engine degreaser, a couple wire brushes, and get this guy cleaned up. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get our throwout bearing installed into the clutch fork so we can get that installed into the bell housing. There's a right and wrong way to do this. Definitely do your research on this. I'm going to show you how to do it, but definitely double check. When you look on this collar right here, it's round all the way around, and then it comes to, I'm going to call it a point right there. Okay, so that point, for lack of a better term, has to face this flat part in the clutch fork. So again, there's your point, there's your clutch fork. Alright, now this is very important. The throwout bearing right here, make sure that this top lip is going over the top of these two forks. You don't want it underneath like that. That's going to cause some serious damage. Again, arrow pointing this way. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is definitely an important step. Again, calling it the arrow or the point facing towards this flat spot. And the top of this is going to go over the top of these two forks. Before I do that, I'm going to apply a little bit of grease here. And just push that into place. There we go. There's a close-up of it. Hopefully you're seeing that. And it just kind of rides like that until you get it into place. Time for the clutch fork to go in. Before we do that, got to apply grease in a few spots. A little bit here where your pivot ball is going to go, down in there. Before the throwout bearing goes in, a little bit on that fork, a little bit on that fork, a little bit there. And on this side here, we're going to put a really thin film of grease on here once I get all the dirt off. Definitely don't want a lot. You don't want it splattering around. All right, ready to go in. And once you got that set in place like that, well, before we go any further, we're going to put a little bit of grease on the ball as well. All right. Just take that. I'm trying to do this one-handed. Let's see what I can do here. There we go. All right, so popped in place. Make sure that the fork's underneath the ball. That's it. All right, so go ahead and get your bell housing set in place. Just going to set it up on your dowel pins. don't know if you could see them, but you got your two, no, definitely can't see that one, but you got your two dowel pins on each side, so obviously that can only go on one way. Grab all your bolts and go ahead and start bolting your bell housing in. Okay, so get your bell housing all tightened up. The 6 larger bolts, I did them to like 45 foot-pounds. I think you can go as much as 50, and maybe as low as like 40. But anyhow, I did 45. And don't forget your 2 bolts down on the bottom. They should be 1/2 inch. They go in from the back side. That's to secure in your backing plate. Now's a good time to go ahead and secure your starter. 2 bolts straight forward. And now we're going to go ahead and put our clutch cable in. And then once that's done, I'm going to slide the transmission in. There is a retaining clip that goes right here. Mine's missing. It was missing when I started the project. I'm going to go ahead and order one, but just know that there is supposed to be a clip there. Alright, we're getting ready to put the transmission in. We're going to go ahead and just put a little bit of grease on the splines here. You don't want to put a lot because it'll end up spraying onto the clutch. A little on here. In here, put a little bit on the inside of your throwout bearing. Alright, so we got the transmission muscled in. We just used the floor jack. A little sketchy, but it worked. Definitely going to need 2 people. Get it on the jack. Hopefully you have a transmission jack or you're up on a lift. But if you're in a garage like me on the floor, that's about all we had to work with. So basically we got it jacked up in line. This thing didn't really want to stay balanced, but you know, you got a guy holding it. Basically get it in line up here. You got to get it through your clutch fork, and once it's lined up, it's lined up. And then you got your 1, 2, and then 3, 4 on the other side. Get your bolts started. Get it in as far as you can, and then take the bolts and kind of go back and forth kitty corner, and it'll draw it in the rest of the way. But we're in. I just got to torque them down, and then we can start putting the cross member in. Okay, so once you get your 4 bolts at least finger tight, make sure the transmission is all the way in. At that point, we're going to go ahead and put our cross member in. This one here we cleaned up a little bit and recoated it. That's going to go into here and into there. Somewhere I got the bolts. We got 2 long bolts for that. Go ahead and get one side set up, and that's our transmission mount. And basically we'll get the one side set up, and then we'll take it and we'll swing it up, and then we're going to tie in the transmission. Once we do that, then we can go ahead and torque those bolts down. You could have done it before you do the cross member, but I like to get the transmission where it's supposed to be first. Alright, so get a bolt through one side, get your nut on the other side, take your motor mount, or I'm sorry, your transmission mount, set that in place, just leave it loose for now, and then we're going to take this guy and lift it up, and you're going to line that up with your bolt holes on the transmission. The transmission end is threaded, and you're going to take your 2 large bolts, and I'm going to do this off camera because you got to push up on this and get it in place. Sometimes it's easier to get a jack underneath there and get it set in place. And then we're going to get our 2 bolts started, and then we'll get our bolt in the other end here and get that started. As you can see, I got that bolt started, that bolt started. If I can get underneath here, get your nuts started underneath on the bottom side. And now you can see that this guy's kind of hanging. So now you either get up underneath here and muscle everything up in place and slide your other bolt through here, or you have another jack. I got this one supporting my transmission right now. You can get another jack underneath here and you can jack it up if necessary. Alright, so at this point you got your bolts through on each end. Again, those bolts are started. Your nuts on the bottom are started. At this point, the transmission is where it's going to be. And just go around, tighten all that up. And then, like I said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tighten up my transmission to Bellhousing 4 bolts. And they're going to be between 45 and 65 foot-pounds. I usually split the difference, so I'll probably do mine at 55. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything tightened up, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so once you get all your bolts torqued down, go ahead and put your speedometer cable back in. Alright, getting ready to put the drive shaft in now. I just have it laying underneath the car, ready to go. Definitely recommend getting 4 new bolts for the drive shaft. I think they were like 15 bucks. You can see they come with the Loctite on them already. So basically, when you're ready, you're going to pull your plug out. I would be ready with your drive shaft before you do that. You really shouldn't get much fluid. But you may get some dripping, so the sooner you can get your shaft end put in there, the better. And we're going to lift the other end, and we're going to bolt it in with our new bolts. Alright, so once you get your shaft end in, we're going to lift up the other end now and start getting a couple bolts started to get it in place. That shaft will slide back and forth. Alright, so we have our drive shaft in. Just go ahead and torque your drive shaft bolts down in the back. Make sure you got the right socket to do that. They can strip very easily, more so when you're taking them off. But yeah, drive shaft's in, transmission's in, clutch is in. Pretty much going to end the video there. The purpose of the video was, you know, for the clutch installation and removing and installing the transmission. You know, again, I know I did the video backwards because I already had this apart a while back before I was doing videos. But that's it in a nutshell. You know, I hope it helped somebody. I do have a video on changing out the universals if you're interested in that. And I'll have more videos coming up. I'm hoping in about a week or so I'll have a cold start video of this car. Hasn't been started in 12 years, so might do drain the gas out, or at least get a lot of it out anyway. So I may make a video on that, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Hope it helped. You can definitely do your own clutch at home. It's a little challenging on the ground on jack stands, but certainly can be done.